Close your eyes for a moment and imagine walking down a British high street in the mid-1960s. The smell of coal smoke lingers faintly in the air. Buses rumble by. Shop windows gleam with bright lettering. But it is not the grocer or the butcher that calls to children. It is the sweet shop. A little bell above the door jingles, and suddenly you are inside a kingdom of glass jars, each one filled with jewels of sugar, lemon drops, pear drops, sherbet pips, licorice whirls, rows upon rows like stained glass in a chapel. Only here the prayers are whispered in pennies and the hymns are sung in laughter. This was the world of British confectionery from the 1960s to the 1980s, a golden chapter when sweets were not only food, but social currency, tokens of childhood, shared in playgrounds and carried home in sticky paper bags. To a child then, a pocketful of coppers was a passport to wonder. Every coin could buy choice, variety, surprise. And in that choice lay freedom, joy, and memory. The 1960s saw Britain emerging from austerity into color and optimism. Just as music, fashion, and television were exploding with new possibilities, so too did sweets reflect a spirit of invention. Companies like Rowntree's, Bassett's, and Treebor filled shelves with creations that balanced tradition and novelty. The sherbet fountain, with its paper-wrapped licorice stick to dip into powder, was half sweet, half game. Love hearts, stamped with messages like, "Be mine" or "Kiss me," transformed sugar into language, passing notes of affection across schoolyards. To taste them was to take part in a culture of play, of flirtation, of innocent rebellion. By the 1970s, the sweet shop had become a democratic meeting ground. For a few pence, you might choose a quarter of cola cubes or a handful of Black Jacks and fruit salads, chewy little squares that stained tongues purple or orange. Each had its loyalists. Some children swore by the sharp fizz of fizzers or the crunchy delight of sweet cigarettes, a playful imitation of adult habits, innocent then, unthinkable now. Others saved their pennies for the chew bars, Wham bars stretching sticky across teeth, their sherbet centers crackling like fireworks. But these sweets were not merely about taste. They were rituals. Friends pulled their coins to buy mixed bags, divvying them out with solemn fairness, or playful arguments. Boys dared each other to hold a sour lemon bonbon in their mouths without wincing. Girls tucked Parma violets in pockets, their floral sweetness more perfume than food, unfolding slowly on the tongue. Each sweet was a role in the theater of childhood, and beyond childhood, sweets played their part in family life. Parents brought them home as rewards. Grandparents slipped them quietly into waiting palms. Teenagers shared them at cinema dates. The sweet shop was a stage for first independence. The thrill of choosing alone, of handling money, of tasting freedom in sugar form. Yet time, as always, would bring change. By the 1980s, supermarkets began to replace the corner sweet shops. Packaging grew more standardized, and some confections began to vanish from shelves. But in their heyday, from the 60s through the 80s, these sweets were woven into daily life as surely as tea and toast. They were not luxuries, they were companions. And so, as we open this box of memories, we ask, what was it about these little packets of sugar that made them so unforgettable? Was it their flavor, their playfulness, or the simple fact that they belonged to a time when life itself seemed sweeter? Behind the rows of glass jars and bright wrappers lay entire dynasties of confectionery makers, names that became part of the national story. Rowntree's of York, Bassett's of Sheffield, Treebor, Barat. They were not simply companies, but custodians of childhood. Each had its specialties, its signatures, its loyal followings. To this day, their names evoke not just taste, but identity, geography, even class. Rowntree's was the master of invention. From their factories came fruit pastilles, soft and dusted with sugar, beloved since Victorian days, but still going strong through the 60s and 70s. Alongside them were fruit gums, stubbornly chewy, testing the patience of children and dentists alike. Yet Rowntree's genius was in capturing imagination. With Smarties, those candy-coated chocolates, they turned color itself into flavor, a rainbow in every tube. For many children, Smarties were their first taste of independence, a coin exchange for a little cylinder of joy. Bassett's, on the other hand, carried an air of tradition. Their licorice all sorts were less about uniformity than variety. Shapes, layers, textures, colors, all jumbled together like a sweet shop condensed into one bag. In their own way, all sorts mirrored the society of the 1960s, eclectic, diverse, playful. Even those who claimed not to like licorice often found a piece they loved in the mix, proving that sometimes joy lies in surprise. Then there were the sherbet wonders. The sherbet fountain, introduced decades earlier, still captivated children in the 60s and 70s. Its yellow paper tube, filled with fizzy sherbet powder, came with a hollow licorice stick meant for dipping. The ritual was messy, impractical, and irresistible. Fingers grew sticky, sherbet dust coated lips, and every dip was a gamble between sweetness and cough-inducing powder. It was less about eating than about playing, a reminder that sweets were toys as much as treats. For those seeking romance, love hearts were irresistible. Small pastel discs stamped with simple messages. Kiss me, be mine, true love. They were currency in the schoolyard of affection, traded shyly between boys and girls, passed in sweaty palms during cinema matinees. Each sweet carried both sugar and courage. Decades later, adults still recall the thrill of receiving the right message at the right time, proof that a cheap sweet could hold the weight of first love. And then there were the more eccentric offerings. Parma violets, with their perfume floral taste, divided the nation. To some, they were delicate and sophisticated. To others, they tasted of soap. But even that division became part of their charm. Blackjacks and fruit salads, chewy penny sweets, stained tongues, and filled playgrounds with laughter as children compared colors on their lips. Drumstick lollies, part toffee, part fruit chew, became sticky summer companions, clinging to fingers and teeth in equal measure. These were more than confections. They were social glue. In playgrounds, children displayed their sweets like badges of identity. One clutched a tube of Smarties, another a paper bag of cola cubes, another a Wham bar as long as his forearm. To share was to belong, to hoard was to challenge. Every sweet was a story, every wrapper a marker of status. And always at the center of it all stood the sweet shop itself, the stage where these dramas played out. Behind the counter, the shopkeeper with his scoop and scales measured out quarters of pear drops or pineapple chunks, tipping them into striped paper bags. For a few pennies, a child walked away not just with sugar, but with a pocketful of moyenne, anticipation, and identity. The story of sweets in Bretagne between the 1960s and 1980s was not only one of abundance, but of drama. It was a theater of constant change, a stage where new inventions dazzled, only to vanish, while others endured to become cultural landmarks. To be a child, then, was to live in a golden age of choice, yet also to witness how quickly a favorite could disappear. The playground itself was the crucible of these dramas. A boy might swagger in with a Wham bar, long, sticky, and explosive with sherbet crystals that fizzed like fireworks on the tongue. It was a spectacle, an edible dare. Wham bars, launched in the late 1970s, symbolized the boldness of the era. Brash packaging, loud flavors, the promise of sensory chaos. Children lined up at corner shops, their coins already warm in their fists, knowing that this sweet would outshine anything else in their school bags. And yet, even Wham's supremacy was fragile, as rivals emerged constantly with brighter wrappers, bigger promises. Then came the rise of novelty sweets, those creations that blurred the line between food and toy. Push pops, twisted upward like tiny lollipops on a stick, became a status symbol in the 1980s, their bright colors flashing in playground rivalries. Gobstoppers, enormous and impossible to chew, tested endurance as much as taste. A child who managed to keep one rolling in his mouth for hours without biting was a hero. And the sherbet dip dab, with its paper packet of sherbet and a flat lollipop for dipping, turned snack time into an adventure, the powder spilling onto clothes, fingers, even the floor, but never failing to amuse. There were moments, too, of cultural symbolism. Sweet cigarettes, white candy sticks packaged to mimic adult smoking, were passed among children with exaggerated bravado. They were not just sweets, but imitations of adulthood, tiny acts of rebellion in sugared form. By the 1980s, changing attitudes to health and childhood innocence began to push them from shelves. But for decades, they had been a rite of passage, the sweet that whispered of growing up, while still safely rooted in play. Cinema and television amplified these dramas. Advertisements broadcast in bright jingles turned sweets into cultural icons. The Refreshers slogan, the Trebor Mints commercial promising lasting freshness, the cheeky voices in Smarties ads, all of these etched themselves into memory as firmly as the flavors themselves. To see your favorite sweet on television was to feel part of something bigger, a national chorus of taste. But the high street was changing. By the late 1970s and early 80s, supermarkets began to muscle aside the small, sweet shops. The glass jars, the careful weighing of quarters, the striped paper bags, all of it gave way to plastic wrappers and barcodes. Suddenly, the theater of choice shrank. The sweets were still there, but the experience had changed. Children no longer pressed noses to glass jars. They picked packets from shelves. The magic dulled. Yet in memory, this era shines brightest. For those who lived it, the 60s-80s were a carnival of flavors, textures, and rituals. They were a time when every sweet carried weight. A sherbet fountain meant adventure. Love hearts meant affection. A Wham bar meant daring. They were tokens of childhood independence, small freedoms bought with pocket money, moments that stitched themselves into the fabric of life. And so, when we look back now, it is not simply sugar we remember. It is the thrill of risk, the play of identity, the rituals of belonging. These were not confections alone. They were childhood itself, crystallized in color and fizz. When the tide of change swept through Britain in the late 1980s, it carried away more than factories and high streets. It carried away the sweets that had defined childhoods. Their disappearance was rarely marked with headlines or fanfare. They simply slipped into silence. Yet the absence was felt in the smallest corners of daily life, in the empty spaces of sweet shop jars, in the puzzled faces of children searching supermarket shelves, in the sighs of adults who suddenly realized that a flavor of their youth was gone. Sweet cigarettes, once ubiquitous, were among the first to fall. As society's view of smoking shifted, the playful mimicry of adult habits came to be seen as dangerous. What had once been innocent rebellion became politically unacceptable. By the early 1990s, they had all but vanished. For children who grew up pretending to puff clouds of sugar, their disappearance was a quiet loss of ritual. Other casualties came more subtly. Blackjacks, with their aniseed punch, and fruit salads, their chewy, tongue-staining cousins, grew harder to find in their original form. Packaging changed, recipes shifted, and slowly the sweets of playground trades lost their place. Some survived in name, but not in spirit. The taste altered, the portion sizes shrunk, the magic thinned. The closure of traditional sweet shops struck an even deeper blow. For generations, the sweet shop had been a theater of delight, a place where a child's world expanded with each glass jar and weighing scoop. When supermarkets replaced them, sweets became anonymous, another product among rows of processed goods. The personal touch of the shopkeeper, the slow ritual of choosing a quarter of pear drops or cola cubes, was replaced by barcodes and plastic packets. Something intimate had been lost. Communities felt the change most keenly. Parents who had grown up with sherbet fountains and penny chews could no longer share them with their children. Grandparents told stories of love hearts and gobstoppers that their grandchildren had never tasted. Memory became the only bridge, and with it came a peculiar nostalgia, not just for the sweets themselves, but for the slower rhythms of life they represented. Even advertising shifted. The catchy jingles and playful characters that once turned sweets into cultural icons faded as health campaigns and corporate consolidation reshaped the market. The cheerful Smarties tube gave way to uniform branding. The bold Wham bar, though still surviving, stood almost alone among a sea of predictable chocolate bars. The wild inventiveness of the 1960s and 70s gave way to the efficiency of the 1990s. And yet, society did not let go easily. Fans wrote letters to companies pleading for returns. Newspapers carried wistful features. Do you remember? Online communities later bloomed, trading memories and recipes, sharing photos of wrappers rescued from old boxes. The very fact that people still spoke of them decades later proved that these sweets were never trivial. They had been woven into the culture's fabric, and their absence created a gap no new product could quite fill. In losing them, Britain revealed something about itself, that food is memory, and memory is identity. The disappearance of a sherbet fountain or a blackjack was not only the end of a sweet, but the end of a ritual, a rhythm, a way of being. The reactions, quiet mourning, nostalgic laughter, endless retellings, show that what we grieve is not the sugar itself, but the childhood, the community, the time that vanished with it. What do we inherit from sweets that no longer exist? At first glance, they were nothing more than sugar, color, and flavoring, ephemeral pleasures designed to vanish on the tongue. And yet, as the years pass, their absence reveals their true legacy. They were not just confections. They were rituals, symbols, and cultural signposts. The love hearts, with their stamped words of affection, remind us that food can speak. In every kiss me or be mine lay not just sugar but sentiment, a way of expressing feelings too shy to be spoken aloud. They left behind more than taste. They left us the memory of first love in chalky pastel form. Even today, modern versions exist, but the originals, tied to the innocence of the 1960s and 70s, remain unmatched. The sherbet fountain, messy and impractical, shows us that sweets were once about play as much as indulgence. To dip, to spill, to cough on powdery fizz, this was all part of the joy. In an age of sleek wrappers and controlled portions, the chaos of the fountain feels almost radical. Its legacy lingers in the idea that eating can be an adventure, not just consumption. The penny sweets, fruit salads, blackjacks, cola cubes, carry a simpler inheritance. They taught children independence. A few coins, carefully counted, became the first lesson in choice, in value, in decision-making. In that tiny act of purchase lay the beginnings of adulthood. What survives today is not just the taste, but the memory of freedom purchased for pennies. And then there is the collective legacy, the way these sweets stitch together communities. A grandmother passing down Parma violets, a father sneaking a gobstopper into a coat pocket, friends trading chews in the schoolyard. They were shared experiences, common ground across class and region. In a country often divided, sweets provided unity. Everyone, from city children to village families, knew the joy of sugar paper bags and sticky fingers. Comparing then to now, the contrast is striking. Modern confectionery is abundant but uniform, designed for efficiency in global markets. Flavors are safer, packaging brighter but less personal. Health warnings loom over every indulgence. The spontaneity, the eccentricity, the sense of local tradition has faded. Today's shelves overflow, but many argue they feel emptier of character. And so the lost sweets offer a lesson. That culture is made as much in the small things as the great. A sherbet dip or a tube of Smarties was not just a treat. It was a moment of belonging, a rhythm in daily life. Their disappearance forces us to see how fragile these rituals are and how easily they can be erased. What remains is memory, sharpened by loss, reminding us to treasure the ordinary while we still have it. For in truth, these sweets gave us more than sugar. They gave us play, love, independence, and unity. That is their true heritage, a sweetness that lingers long after the taste is gone. And so our journey through the sweet shops of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s comes to its close. We have wandered among sherbet fountains and penny chews, unwrapped love hearts and Wham bars, felt the fizz of childhood independence in the crackle of a paper bag. These confections, long vanished or transformed, still live within us, not as sugar, but as memory, stitched into the rhythm of British life. They remind us of a Britain that was slower, more communal, more playful. A country where children pressed noses to glass jars, where grandparents slipped Parma violets into waiting hands, where love could be declared in chalky pastel sweets. Their disappearance leaves us asking, what else have we lost, unnoticed, while chasing the conveniences of modern life. For even now, in supermarkets gleaming with endless choice, many feel that something essential is missing. The shelves are full, but do they carry the same magic? The sweets we recall, the ones that no longer exist, were more than products. They were bridges between generations, between innocence and adulthood, between the ordinary and the extraordinary. And perhaps they still are. Whenever someone recalls the snap of a gobstopper, the powder of sherbet clinging to lips, or the thrill of finding just the right message in a love heart, the past lives again. In memory, these sweets are eternal. They never truly vanish as long as someone remembers, as long as someone whispers, "Do you remember?" But maybe there are still secrets left to uncover. Recipes hidden in dusty ledgers, wrappers tucked away in forgotten drawers, factories whose walls still smell faintly of sugar. Could some of these lost treasures return? Or are they destined to remain forever in the kingdom of memory, sweeter precisely because they cannot be tasted again? And so the question lingers like the last trace of sherbet on the tongue. Was that really the end of the story? Or only the beginning of another waiting to be told?